parking issues on Monceaux. Commissioner Rouse, you want to tee this up?
Yeah, I have been contacted by a number of the residents regarding the parking on Monceaux and the Dixie corridor in terms of people who are working on Dixie, parking on the side streets. And we were trying to figure out, because it's causing a number of problems, unintended issues that need to be addressed. One is because of the number of cars that are on the street cleaning machines can't come through, excuse me, can't come through, and they're clogging the drains, and there's flooding as a result of the parking issue. And the citizens have asked either that we have permit parking and or one-sided parking that alternates in order to address that issue.
Hi, good morning.
When?
Mayor and Commissioner, good morning. Wending. Yes, we did look at this closely, and there's a few things that's going on in this area. The street width is 30 feet, and when we looked at it, that we noticed that adjacent to Dixie Highway itself, there are some parking that's so close to Dixie that's blocking the site triangle. So there are some short-term improvements that we can do there, such as signage, and it will need enforcement. The other thing, I do agree with you, looking at time of day parking for garbage collection as we looked at that area. So we're going to work with Public Works to decide which day. I know we picked up 2 days a week, so we may alternate as we divide that strategy. The other thing is the neighborhood actually contacted us in reference to additional speed bumps along that area. We know that it crossed the train tracks, and we know that there are a significant amount of cut through that goes through that area, so we're going to address that at the same time. From a longer term, and I think it's more midterm improvement, is that it's part of the South Dixie project with FDOT, that the limit actually extends south of this all the way to Albemarle. And with that project, we're going to create on-street parking that will hopefully accommodate some of these demand for on-street parking. But as in response to your question about permit parking, and I know Scott and I has talked about this and the challenge that comes with permit parking, that we have to figure out a way not only for enforcement, but it has to be a system in general. I used to live in a permit parking area, and when you have residents or a guest that's visiting, you have to call. There got to be a system in place that they, what kind of permit, how do you charge them? We used to pay a fee that's on our water bill. Is it a one general area, or is it a whole district, or is it the whole city? And so some of those are policy decisions that will affect this commission and the mayor if we want to discuss that further. But I think if I can offer some short-term and mid-term solution, the short-term is let us install some no parking signs in that area that would not block driveways and block access to the adjacent businesses. The other thing is that we're going to work with parking administration to establish more and more frequent enforcement, as we don't want them to block driveways. And then lastly is we will share with you the preliminary strategy as how many parking spaces that we're looking to create along Dixie itself to hopefully shift and some of that demand onto Dixie, as it is part of the midterm plan. And then really time of day parking with Public Works is a strategy that we can come to you.
Commissioner Rouse, any further questions?
Yeah. From what I understand, the issues on Pershing, Avila, and Sunset are what caused the problems on Monceaux. And so have you looked at those streets as well?
It would have to, yes, sir. It has to be part of a network. And because part we know about parking is that you're going to shift demand onto other streets. You're chasing it down the street, essentially. So it would have to be a network as itself. And we develop a strategy as a zone, not so much as one particular street, yes.
And would you be willing to meet with the residents to try to come up with a resolution to this?
Absolutely. Once we have a draft strategy, we would meet with the resident before we come back to the city.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. I frequent a number of businesses that are along Dixie in this area, and parking is very limited. And some of these businesses, one I can think of has at least 4 businesses in a plaza. I feel like that is the size of these tables here, and there's maybe 4 parking spots. In those instances, I see people who pull into that parking lot, can't find a spot, and then they circle around and park on the neighboring streets. And I understand they're public streets and able to park there, but I'm just wondering 2 questions. One is, were some of those situations grandfathered in when we didn't have a parking policy on the number of parking spots per business, or are they operating out of code? And then the second question is, as we are looking at further development on the Dixie corridor, is that something that we can look at, which is shared parking spaces, shared parking lot, some sort of public transportation, or trolley, or the free ride that helps this situation? Because I see a lot of great development along Dixie, and I know that a lot of residents and the business owners want that and want to be able to walk there and have these different options, but I just want us to be sure that we're mitigating the parking and traffic issue on our neighborhood roads.
Sure. And part of when we look at a zone in this area, we don't just particularly look at residential or the businesses. We're looking at employees parking, and we want to study those behavior and interview them, because there are some opportunities, like you said, that for shared parking across the street, but we have to create a safe way for them to get to those areas. So we're going to identify these opportunity zones to see how we can share among each other. For example, in other areas, we know that sometimes there's nighttime businesses like restaurants that's really popular, that we have identified other daytime businesses that we can potentially work with these businesses to create shared parking opportunities.
And the question about the current businesses, do you think, maybe it's...
I would defer to Rick Greene to answer that question.
Thank you.
Commissioner, usually most of those buildings, you are correct, those are grandfathered in, and at the time, the parking wasn't required for the use. So when a new structure comes in, let's say the Walgreens on Southern and Dixie, it's a brand-new building, a brand-new renovation, they are required to comply with the city's parking code. Same with the subway across the street. When a building does a renovation, we look at the non-conforming status. If it's a non-conforming building, and they do modifications less than 50% of the total value, they are not required to meet the existing code. But what my planners do is look at the plan and then try to recommend to the property owner what landscaping and or parking improvements can be made to maybe provide some additional parking. They're not necessarily obligated by code to meet the new standard, but if they have 4 spaces and we can redesign the improvement such that they can add another 2 and then provide some additional landscaping, that's always our goal. That typically happens through a minor amendment. But to your point, they are typically grandfathered in. If it's a brand-new development, the Carefree example, as an example, they would have to meet the new code.
Thank you.
One question I have, and I know that FDOT signed off on this road diet, and I think they're going to start the engineering process, is what kind of thinking have we given? I know part of that includes more on-street parking, et cetera, but it just seems to me, as President Lambert mentioned, that there's a lot more commercial activity going on South Dixie now than perhaps even a couple of years ago. So what will FDOT take into account the increased parking needs that we're discussing here today as they're considering the layout of that street? Because I don't think on-street parking is going to satisfy the demand.
Yep.
Yes.
I can answer that. In fact, we've had a lot of discussions on this with the merchants and the homeowners down there. We've had, and just in the last 2 weeks, we've had 3 or 4 meetings just on that area. And what we've encouraged FDOT is to maximize the on-street parking in regard to the improvements that are being done down there. So that's very important for the merchants as well as the neighborhoods, that we maximize that. But in concert with that, in the stretch that we're talking about doing this project in, we've actually done a study that looked at shared parking opportunities. We've looked at modifying some of the side streets, for instance, in where we've ended up looking at maybe doing 2 one-way pairs in lieu of having, so that we can maximize the amount of parking actually even on the side streets where necessary. We have a plan, and we're going to be meeting with the merchants first, and then we were going to actually outreach to the community. We need to have meetings with the residents down there to talk about opportunities and make sure that we're working together with the community to try to fix some of these issues, because it's a hard issue. It's not something that's going to be easily solved, but we think that there's some opportunities that could benefit all of us in that regard. So,
Thank you. Commissioner Rouse, did you have a?
Just briefly, the residents have told me that Table 26, and I love Table 26, it's a great restaurant. Their valet parking on the side streets, and that likewise is contributing to the already problematic situation that we have, and we need to figure that out as quickly as possible. And if they are out of code, then perhaps we need to deal with them as well.
agreed. I'll answer
Okay.
that we do need to look at some of these restaurants that are valet parking on city streets. That may be a solution in certain areas, but other areas is causing issues, and we're going to need to end up regulating that in a way. And we do have the ability to regulate a lot of that, because if they are valeting on city streets, we can regulate that. So,
Commissioner?
Thank you. I know that we'll be having future meetings with DOT and discussing the road program on Dixie. But just another point that the residents brought up in this issue was when you pull out of the neighborhood and you try to make a left onto Dixie, that you can't see because of the cars that are parked along the road. And more times than not, I make a right-hand turn even though I need to go left because of those cars there. So I just ask that when we're working with DOT on that we're looking at that resolution to that issue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two things. You're talking about the site triangle as you're turning left. There's two things that we have to do. One is within our street itself, we should not allow cars to park so close to Dixie itself all the way to the edge. And the other thing that FDOT is part of their design is to look at the stopping sight distance of the vehicle approaching and what that site triangle is, and those areas are to be free of, one is landscaping, and two, parked cars.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments on this matter? Okay, thank you very much. Uyen?